Hey guys, in this video we're going to cover loop creation, timing and cut functions, as well as VST instrument implementation and folder arrangement for those VST instruments. Then we're going to lay down a song using VST instruments, the loop creation, as well as some audio loops, and show you how that you can fit those all together. So let's begin. One of the first things that you want to do before recording with MIDI is to ensure that all of your MIDI controller's latest drivers are installed. In my case, I'm using the Oxygen 49 keyboard as my MIDI controller. This keyboard has the latest drivers installed, and therefore I know for sure that it's going to work properly. The second thing you want to do is go to your Edit menu and Preferences. As covered in a previous video, you can also simply hit the P button on your keyboard. Scrolling down to the MIDI section, go to Devices and ensure that the input and the outputs are selected for that MIDI controller. Hit Apply and Close. Thirdly, you want to go to the MIDI track that you'll be using and select Omni as the input source, as this will allow for use of all the channels. Now, when I hit my keyboard, you'll notice now that it actually has audio running through that MIDI signal. If you load a track and it looks like this, it is notable to mention that this is simply a MIDI track, and without an audio track routed from it, you'll hear nothing coming from this track, as MIDI itself is not a sound. It's simply a set of instructions that synths understand to produce sound. For instance, your gas pedal is not the engine, but it sends the signal to the engine to tell it to go. So in order to get this MIDI track to make any noise, I have to send it somewhere in order for it to make that noise. I have to give it somewhere to send those instructions. And so if I go to my in, of course I can use my Oxygen keyboard to set the in. And then I can use my out to go to any one of the virtual instruments that I have loaded up already. If I was to send this to Dimension Pro, for instance, you're going to see that the MIDI signal is still coming in here, but the sound itself is actually coming off of the channel that has Dimension Pro loaded on it, or track 5. If at any time you don't hear MIDI coming out of that MIDI track, it could be that this is not selected. This is your input echo. You want to go to your Preferences menu. We'll hit P on the keyboard again. Go to MIDI, Playback and Recording, and make sure that Always Echo Current MIDI Track is selected. This will make sure that whatever track that you have selected does have audio signal coming through it. For instance, if I was to select track 5, you'll notice that the input echo automatically comes on, and it's off for the rest of them, unless I have said otherwise. This can be very useful, as you can hear all of the MIDI instruments at the same time, if you'd like to, by making sure that this is selected, and then also making sure that your input is set to your MIDI controller. So by doing this, I could actually audition each and every one of these MIDI instruments together at the same time. In this portion of the tutorial, we're going to talk about actually getting your virtual instruments loaded and using them to produce the song. I'm going to go ahead and delete the MIDI track that was inserted previously, as I'll not be using it in this particular tutorial. Now, by hitting the B button on my keyboard is the shortcut for the browser, which should pop out here. If for any reason your browser does not pop out, you can simply go to Views and Browser. From this view, you have several different options: Instruments, Rewire, MIDI effects, and Audio effects. By selecting Instruments and right-clicking on the Plugins tab up here, I can then sort them by manufacturer, by type, or by category. Commonly, I will set mine to category, as it's the easiest for me to understand. If I need drums, I can go straight to drums, guitar, loops, and so on and so forth. I'm going to hit my B button to close the browser again, as most of the virtual instruments that I'll be using are already loaded into the system. The way that I inserted these virtual instruments was going up to this plus symbol, selecting which one of the virtual instruments that I wanted to put into the system, setting my applicable settings here, and then simply hitting Create. This is one of the fastest ways to utilize virtual instruments within Cakewalk by BandLab. As it does not require a secondary routing from MIDI to audio, it simply creates an instrument track that upon loading is already ready to be played. Now as you can hear, although I was playing the track that was selected, I'm still getting a signal from somewhere else. And that's because up here at the top, my input is still set to the oxygen. If I set that back to none, the problem will go away. I'm going to go ahead and delete this track as I'm not going to be using it in this particular tutorial. Now going back up to track 1, if at any time I want to look at what virtual instruments I have inserted, I can simply click on the icon here and it brings up the virtual instrument that I have already preloaded. So this concludes this portion of the tutorial as far as getting the virtual instruments up and running. I hope that I've cleared up any confusion as far as what exactly MIDI is and how to make sure that your MIDI is coming through on your system. It can be very frustrating at times, I understand, but with just a little bit of practice, it becomes very easy over time. Okay, now we're at the portion of the tutorial where I'm going to show you how to use the MIDI and the loops that are provided within Cakewalk to make a song out of this. We're going to record some audio as well, just to show you how that you can use audio itself as loop-based information within a mix. I'm going to go to the very first track, which I've entitled Main Beat, and by clicking on this little icon right here, it'll bring up the virtual instrument, which in this case is Addictive Drums 2. I already have a drum loop that I've selected for this particular tutorial that I'm just going to drag and drop into the session. Mallet Groove 3 in this case. By clicking it and dragging it into the blank area of the track here, it'll automatically set it to the very beginning. Now I can close this out and ensure that the MIDI input is set to none, as it's already getting its information from here. It no longer needs information from the keyboard. Now I'm going to right click on this track to ensure that groove clip looping is enabled. If it's not enabled, when you go to drag the track out, you're not going to see any MIDI information being copied to the next beat or measure. So by clicking groove clip looping or Ctrl L on your keyboard will ensure that when I drag this out, all of the applicable information will be gathered with it. I'm going to drag this out to an undefined stopping point for the sake of this tutorial. I'm going to make sure that my input is now set to none, as it no longer needs my keyboard to provide it information. It now has the MIDI information already in the track. I'm also going to set the color of this to something a little brighter so that I can see the MIDI information. Now going down to track 2, which I've labeled Layer 3, I'm going to bring up the virtual instrument here, which in this case is Expand 2, a soft female O pad. I've got my input set to the USB Oxygen 49. So now I'm going to click Record here and hit the R button on my keyboard, which will allow for recording. Not necessarily my best performance, but it'll do. So now I can disarm the record feature and also turn off the USB Oxygen on this track as well. I now have something that I can use as a loop. By holding down the Alt key and using the scroll wheel on my mouse, I can zoom into this project at any time. Wherever my transport bar is ultimately where it's going to zoom into. I want to make sure that the first note of my playing is lined up with the very first note that's being played. So I'm going to click and drag this over. Now I'm going to ensure that it's also lined up within the rest of the grid. So by going to the end of this, it looks like it's just a little off. So I'm going to click and drag the end of it to where it's found within those guidelines. Now I'm going to check the timing of my playing against the loop that was already imported. I'm going to click on this beat here and ensure that it lines up with my playing. In this case, it does not. So what I can do is simply double click this open up my selection tool and select all of the MIDI information that I just played. By right-clicking now anywhere in here, I can go to quantize and set it to a 16th duration. I'm going to ensure that the note durations is also checked. My strength is set to 100 so that it will quantize and snap to the grid like I want it to. I'll now hit OK. And as you can see, everything is brought into an alignment. I'm going to go ahead and select the Move tool and bring this up to an area where it starts actually at the beginning. Let's take a listen to what this sounds like now. Okay, now we're finally starting to get somewhere. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this, right click, and ensure that the groove clip looping is enabled. Now when I click and drag this, using the Smart tool, it's going to copy this out infinitely as well. Now the next thing I'd like to do is add a shaker in here. This will be an actual recorded audio. So I'm going to go to Insert Audio Track, ensure that my input is set to the microphone that I'd like to record from. Now you can see my voice coming through the microphone before I begin recording. With my shaker in hand, I'm going to go ahead and lay down a shaker track. Okay, yet again, not the greatest of performances, but it'll do for all intrinsic purposes. I'm going to go ahead and trim the edit points to where I want this to begin and end. Disarm the recording, and yet again set this to something a little bit more visible. Let's take a listen to what that sounds like as of now. Okay, it's not too bad, but I can tell that there's definitely some timing differences between this recording and the one that is obviously loop-based. So as you can see, if I click on this here, it's not exactly in time. It's close though, so we're going to use it. I'm going to bring the editing point up until it reaches the beginning of that measure. And I'm also going to ensure that this one is aligned with the grid as well. And it looks like it stops at about a halfway point in one of the measures. I'm going to set this to fade out, and then I'm going to select the file itself and go to Audio Transients. By double clicking on this track, I can bring up the audio snap feature, and then I can quantize it to the grid as well. The threshold is currently at 0. If I move the 0 up, it's going to bring less of those transients into view. I actually only want the main transients to be moved, so 36 looks pretty good for this. I'm going to go ahead and quantize it yet again to a 16th note duration. Let's take a listen now to see if it actually helped or hindered. It sounded like that might have been just a little bit much, so by double clicking once again, I'm going to go quantize and set the strength to 50. I'm also going to take note durations off, as it seems like it might have affected some of those ghost notes. Now I'll hit OK. Let's try this again. Okay, so the only part where it seems like it gets a little wonky is down here at the end, and it looks like maybe there's a extra transient that was picked up there. One easy way to fix this is to simply just cut out that portion of audio, as it will all be based off of a loop anyway, and essentially I only needed just a few bars. Now I'm going to go over here and select clips again, and bring this back to where it's locked into the grid. There's 2 measures, and that should be fine. I'm going to go ahead and click on this, right click on it, and bounce the clip. By bouncing the clip, I've just applied the Audio Snap Features timing adjustments. Now if I was to groove clip loop this, it's going to set it to the tempo, to the timing of my project, and I don't want it to do that. So the easiest way to do this is just simply click it, drag and drop it into the next until I get to the end point that I wanted it at to begin with. Click and drag my edges to make sure that they're crossfades, and now this is what I have. And it sounds like it's getting off a little bit right here. Quick fix there. As well as right here. Now it should be lined up here, but it's not. So what I can do is simply select the clip, and by using the keypad I hit 3 to move it over to where it's in time. This is called your nudge feature. It still doesn't sound like the fade is quite good enough, so I'm going to bring this clip over and let this clip do the beginning. Okay, now that all of these changes are applied, I'm going to go ahead and bounce this as a clip. Now this is one giant loop in a sense that I can just simply copy and paste anywhere I'd like. Now that it's snapped to the grid, I know that it's going to be in time anywhere else that I move it, because it was already in time before. Now I can select 2 at a time by holding Shift, selecting the next, holding my Control button, clicking and dragging this. So there's a quick way to build loops out of actual audio. Let's go ahead and produce the rest of this song quickly, see what we can do with it. I'm now going to move on to Track 3, Middle Earth. Alright, let's begin. Moving on to the next track. It's turning into something rather interesting. Let's go on to the next track. Okay, so here's our finished track that we've got. With a little bit of mixing and some EQ and some adjustments, it could probably turn into a song. I don't know. Hopefully this was helpful though. If it was, please comment, like, subscribe, share. Make sure you hit that bell icon so that every time I upload a new video, you'll be the first to know. If this has been helpful, please let me know. If there's anything else you'd like for me to cover, leave that in the comments below as well. Thank you. You'll have a blessed day.